Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making Groovy House drums inspired by Chris Lake's edit of Harry Romero's song, Fool for Love. We're going to find out if we can do this in under 30 minutes by using the 80-20 rule of house music drum production. What you're listening to right now is the song we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to focus on this drum group right here, and we're going to go in order of the layers that I actually built them out while building this out inspired by this tune, so that you can follow along when building out drums in this style of music. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we'll be doing a full recap of the 80-20 rules so you can apply what you learned in this video to your own music. Because all in all, it only took me about 30, maybe 40 minutes to recreate the drums for this one. And if we pull this out and have a look at this, you'll see that it's fully arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to go to be used in DJ sets or sent out to labels. So if finishing songs faster is something that you'd like help with, I've made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So first things first, let's have a listen to the drums without me yapping so you can just hear kind of what's going on here. Cool, so it's kind of like techie, housey kind of drums that we're going to be creating here. So first things first, I'm going to turn off every single layer so we can go in order as I actually built it out while I was creating it, so you can kind of go through the thought process of how I was going through this, so you can do something similar when you're building it yourself. So we're going to start with the kick, and before that, there's definitely a little trick I want to show you. What I'd recommend doing is grabbing the song that you want to use as a reference and throwing it in here, and then turning it off and setting it up so when you press the S key on your keyboard, it'll flip between what you're working on and the reference. It's going to be really, really important. That way you can build your drum track to a professional standard. Also, what I'd recommend is once you throw it in here, using what I call an arrangement track, or I'm sure many people call it this, but it's just dummy MIDI clips that you can color code so you can figure out where the sections of each song are. And this is important because once you build out the song vertically, like you create your loop, you're going to be able to use this to flesh everything out into an actual full track. And then also as you're building out sections of the song, say when you're working on the drums, it could be important to find an area where there's just drums, like for example, the intro or the outro. And you can kind of move your loop marker over here, work on the drums here, then move your loop marker over to where the bass comes in, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really important first thing I want to get off the bat, because we're going to be heavily using the reference track in order to get a high quality drum track going on here. So with that out of the way, the first thing we're going to go over is a kick. And if you've been following these videos for a while, you'll notice now the kick is outside of the drum group, and we're going to get into that in more the tail end of this video, talking about the mixing side of things. But first things first, always the first thing to do, in my opinion, is make sure you have the right pattern. So with my template that you can grab, if you want to grab the project files, I have this kick set up so that there's already a drum rack with a bunch of usable sounds, as well as MIDI clip with like the obvious drum pattern. So it's this 4 on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern. So I didn't have to do too much moving around or create any MIDI clips. It was already ready to go, because when listening back and forth between what we have and the reference, you can hear it's just a classic 4 on the 4 kick drum. So once we have the pattern on the way, let's move right along to the next step, which is once you have the pattern, setting the right sound selection. And what I'm finding with drums, one of the best ways to do this is to find a section of the song that has just the drums, which again is why it's important to have these nice little arrangement markers here, and find an area where they're like the kick is more or less playing by itself. So I found this area right here, and I just kind of snipped it out just like this, and you can hear there's like a crash cymbal, and I'm gonna show you how you can actually steal this in a nice way. So once you've kind of grabbed it, you do Command E on each side, and press Command J to consolidate it. So this way it's not like the full, like if I zoom out on this sample, it's not the full track, but if I go here and then zoom out, it's the full song. So you want to make sure that it's as isolated as possible. And then what I have over here, and you can have access to this again in the project files, but I have this little R kick drum rack. And so I just dragged it into here, and then it has a couple of interesting features, basically just macros of the Ableton Simpler device to make things a lot quicker and easier to use. The main thing here is instead of just bringing down the filter frequency, which would kind of make it sound unnatural, like it does get rid of kind of like that crash and some of the cymbals and all that, but it makes it sound like it's losing a lot of the character of the kick drum. You can set it to a filter envelope, and this way it's going to kind of retain a lot of that actual drum sound. So let me just show you what that sounds like here. So that is the kick isolated, and if I bring up the filter frequency, you can hear all that, like the cymbals and everything like that. So this way, what you do have is you have a kick that you've snatched from the actual track, and that's going to be very close to the sound selection. Something that I'd also recommend doing is you can flatten and freeze that if you want to use this as a similar sound source, but you can also use a similar sound source for the one that you snatched right here. So what do I mean by that? So right here, there's this original kick sound. If I click this in Ableton 12, right click it and press show in browser, it's going to show the sample in the browser here, and this little button here, if you press this, it's going to show a bunch of sounds that are similar in like timbre and quality and texture and all that kind of good stuff to that original source that you've just snipped out. So this is a really cool way that you can build up a nice little, use that technique to build up a library, you could see here, of similar sounds that you can then use to audition to try to find the best one that sounds as similar as possible to the reference. This way you have one that you've stolen from the track, and then you also have one that is actually from your like one-shot library, which is probably going to be more high quality. And then I'm going to show you a way that you can blend the two. So, but first, I want to show you kind of the method once you've built out a little library. Basically, the idea is pretty simple. Like I'd find an area of the track where there's just drums playing. And then what you can just do is you can grab one of these and then flick between the reference track, almost like rhythmically, and then use the arrow key, like that. Just like that. So you're kind of jumping between the reference and yours and flicking between the different samples that you found to find the one that sounds the most similar to your ear. Obviously, at a certain point, you can decide, like, I don't think it sounds similar, but I like how this particular kick sounds, and that's cool. But that's kind of the idea here. This way you're getting something really similar to the source material. Then another trick that I like to do is, I've been doing this quite a bit for most of these, is if you grab the notes here and press Option, it'll make a duplicate of it. And I'm just dragging that down to the stolen kick. So this way I have a one shot that sounds similar playing as well as the stolen kick. And then, sorry about that. And then what I've just simply done is use an EQ to remove a bunch of the low end. So like the meat and the potatoes is coming from the one shot. So it's a high quality one shot. And some of the texture, the mids and the high end is coming from that stolen kick. And they're kind of working together to sound nice, in my opinion. Then something I have been adding quite a bit lately is this drum bus. And basically using this boom feature to add a bit of subbiness to the bottom end. So if we listen to this without it, and then with it, just add some like low end subbiness, can sound a bit fuller, more professional, particularly when you're stealing kicks. Like if you were just using the stolen kick, which is totally something that could work. Something like this could help add in a little bit of extra low end to that stolen kick, which could be useful. And in this case, I'm also shelving out some of the highs as opposed to filtering out some of the highs. Look like this, which is just a little bit more of a natural way to tame some of the high end without having that really like mellowed out sound. So that's kind of what happened there. Then the last step. So first step is to get the right pattern. Second step is to get the right sound. Third step is to just get the right volume. So the main method here is just listening to it, flicking back and forth, and adjusting your volume on the main track fader here. Just doing this and doing it in a way it's rhythmic, where you can almost imagine hearing your kick in the song because you're doing it in a rhythmic way like that. And just adjust your volumes so you get a similar volume level, a similar power kind of level, if that makes sense. Getting a little Dragon Ball Z reference there. But that would be the idea. Once you have the right set pattern, the right sound, and the right volume, that's going to be that 80% of the way there. That's going to make your stuff sound professional, and you don't have to worry too much about crazy processing or anything like that. The next step, once you have the kick, because the kick is one of the most fundamental bits of the drum kind of cohesive sound, what I would recommend doing next is going through basically the same procedure as you're listening to each additional element and going in order of what you hear or perceive to be as the most important next element. In most cases after the kick, this is probably going to either be the open hat or the clap or snare. So use your ear to decide what you think is the most important, then dial that next sound in. So in this instance, what I heard next was the open. So let me jump into the section here and I'll give you a look and listen to the open here. And the reference. So definitely a little different. I definitely kind of struggled with getting the right hi-hat sound, the right open hi-hat sound, but this is generally a look at what this is. So let me break down the pattern first. So main thing is it's just this like on the offbeat here. If you can see this, just pay attention to this one here. So the offbeat, that's that classic open hat sound. And again, the template that I have sets this up so it's already there, so I don't have to like plug this in each time. It's just all about working fast. And then what I have is that's similar here and here. So in this one, I was hearing like a bunch of different layers, open hat layers, kind of panned mostly to the left, and then maybe one on the right, just kind of balancing things out a little bit. And then there's also that little like little kind of groove bit that comes in. You can see that right here and right here. And then it's also bouncing like call and response. So this one hits and then that one hits. So let's kind of have a look in. Like, and then the second one goes. So cool little groove here, very subtle but very nice. I'm not sure if I nailed the drum sound, but also when you hear the kind of Billie Eilish flip that I did of it, I feel like it works to let that vocal shine a little bit more. So I did end up taking a little bit of creative liberties, but let's kind of look at the pattern there. So it's mostly just the classic open hat pattern with a little bit of a skippiness, and then a couple different layered sounds. Again, same thing, was just flicking back and forth between the reference and what I was building to try to find the right sounds. I did also use the similar sound function. So in my template for this, if you look at the drum rack that I have set up, this group here are all like hi-hat sounds that I took the time to take from different reference tracks and build out like a little library. So I always have some open hats that I can use really quickly instead of having to go through the whole browser and waste a bunch of time. Here I have like 5 or 6 ones that I really like and I could use really quickly. But then I also did the similar sound function on an open hat somewhere in the song. Basically same idea as the kick, sliced it out and then opened in the browser here and then press that little button. And then I added in a bunch of different additional hat sounds to get something a little bit closer to what I was hearing in the reference. Other than that, a little bit of processing. This is the standard channel strip that I have that shows up on pretty much every MIDI and audio track. I leave the kick and the bass slightly different because I want the low end to just come through nicely, and I do a lot less of this processing, but let's get that yap out of the way. First thing is some EQ. This is usually set up to be rolling off at least 200 hertz. That way it's kind of in a good spot where it's making room for the kick and the bass, and then I can quickly adjust it. In this instance, we're moving a whole ton of the low end so that the open hat's mostly just kind of like shimmering in the high end mostly, because it is being reinforced by additional sounds, shakers, and close hats, which we'll go in a second. The next thing is it's running into this transient shaper. So this is a free kilohertz transient shaper. What we're doing here is we're adjusting the sustain of the sound so that it's a bit tighter sounding. And I feel like that's a pretty good key to professional sounding drums when things are tight and cohesive as opposed to like loose and floppy. And then we're running into a little bit of Ableton saturation. Again, I've just mapped it to a knob here. So I can just one knob it instead of having to open up like the plugins and look at the UI and all this stuff. I can just quickly dial it into with my ear and then move on to the next step really quick. This is just making the sound a little bit fuller, adding a little bit of grit and texture. And then I also have been experimenting with this. We're going to get into this as well in the melodic section. But this is a program called Fast Reveal where you can add the sidechain. So the sidechain is the vocal. And then this is using the vocal to duck certain like EQ bands, frequency bands, when the vocal is appearing, just to get it out of the way of the vocal. I found the open hat to be quite like intense in this one. And I was using this as a technique to allow the vocal to shine through a little bit more. But then other than that, main thing is flicking back and forth between the reference and this, and really just trying to listen to the open hat to dial in the right volume. The next thing that I was hearing was this shaker sound. Definitely sounds like the main driving elements of that open hat groove is that open hat combined with a shaker. So let's have a look and listen to that. And soloed. So you can see here, it's following a similar pattern to the open hat. It might look a little confusing at first, but it won't in a second. So basically you can see that everything's landing on the offbeat here, just like the open hat. And simply what I've done is layered in two different sounds. And I have two playing at the same time, and then a different two playing, fluctuating every like half beat or so, or half bar or so. And this is just a way to make it sound a little bit more human. Things are slightly changing over time. Stuff like this is pretty important in house music to make things, make it sound like it's changing and evolving instead of sounding like robotic and crappy and too rigid. Switching up the samples is a nice way to add some humanization touch. And then it's doing a little kind of fillish thing that's similar to the open hat to kind of play together with that. So just the open hat and the shakers. And then just the open hat. So it's basically adding some body and texture to the open hat. It's a really cool little trick there. Main thing other than that is I just looked up shaker sounds in my library here and just found them. I didn't do any similar sound feature or anything like that. I didn't have too many shakers to look through, so it wasn't too bad. Any processing that's going on here, the shaker shouldn't be too much, and that's a pattern you'll notice. Just removing some of the lows, adjusting some of the sustain to tighten it up, and a little bit of saturation to pull it out a bit more, make it sound a little bit fuller. And then let's move on to the next element. Next element I ended up adding was a top loop. This is a little different than the way I normally go about things. Usually I'll kind of get the core elements in with MIDI, so like kick, open hat, hat, snare, and then add in some like extra texture with a top loop. But in this instance, I was feeling it a little earlier. So let's have a listen to this. And so what like a top loop is nice for is complementing your core hits that you've added in to make things sound a little bit more natural and groovy and human. And it's really hard to program in some of these things. So it could be a nice way to add in a loop like this. A couple of tips when adding in tops like this is when you click the clip, you can set it to beats and transients and then set it so the right arrow, this arrow is pointing to the right. And then you can dial this knob down, and this is going to do similar to that transient shaper that we were using where we're adjusting the sustain. It's going to tighten up all the hits, and when this is nice and tight, it can really blend a lot nicer into the rest of your core hits. So that's a nice little trick there. Other than that, removing some lows, a little bit of one knob sidechain. Let me just quickly show you how I do that. So instead of like routing a compressor and dialing in compressor settings and all of that really annoying stuff, in my opinion, I just have an Ableton shaper going in this kind of shape here. Moving at a rate of a quarter note, which is a quarter note, it's what the kick is hitting. And then it's just ducking the gain here. So this one knob just shows how much, adjusts how much volume is being ducked. So with just one knob, I can get like that ducking sound, which is allowing the tops here to make room for the kick because it's ducking out of the way of the kick. And also that's like a nice pumping kind of sound that's very, very pleasant in dance music. It's very groovy, I would say. Then adding in a bit of saturation, filling out that top sound a bit. And then also here is the last bit of the channel strip that I always use. This is it's called Polyverse Wider, and it's a free plugin, again, just like the transient shaper. And just like that transient shaper, I've mapped the core knobs to an Ableton rack here so that I can dial things into taste instead of having to open it up and get distracted. And what this is doing is a nice pleasant way to push the sound to the left and right, make it a little bit more stereo, which is also making some room for everything else in the middle to shine through. You're making space for it. This with the top loop, mostly dialed into taste as opposed to doing like the flick back and forth reference technique. And then the next element I added was these closed hats. So let's have a look and listen. Solos. So this one is something I added in to try to get it sound closer to the reference. I had a different, more subtle hat sound playing. And then I used like that similar sound functionality on the open hat to find this closed one and then adjusted it here. So originally this was a different sound. And you can see the pattern, it's just classic offbeat open hat pattern. Again, set up in the template, so it's already like this. So it's just a process of moving it up and down as you're referencing the track. In terms of any processing, removing some of the lows, increasing some of the sustain to try to make it sound a little bit more like an open hat and blend in with those shakers and open hats a bit. A little bit of saturation to fill out the sound, add a little bit of grit and texture. And then again, with this, back to the idea of listening to it and then flicking back between the reference. So you can hear there with a closed hat, the shaker, and those open hats, it's starting to sound a little bit fuller, closer to the original reference. At this point, I then moved on to the claps and snares. What I was hearing first was the clap, so I added that in. Let's take a look and listen to that. So for this, the pattern is like the classic snare or clap pattern. So it's on the 2 and the 4 of each bar. So if we just look at this, this is what the template originally looked like. It's already set up in those classic positions. So then it's just a matter of either switching the sample around or making some slight adjustments with the basis already ready there to go. Makes things a little faster when you're cooking up tunes. Again, you can see similar to idea to the shaker sound where I've layered 2 sounds and it's kind of changing from hit to hit. Again, as a humanization kind of way. In terms of the sound selection for this is similar to the open hat that I showed you, where I have a library here of like clap sounds that I've vetted. So that way I'm not looking through 200 clap sounds. I have like 5 or 6 that I like quite a lot that I've used as reference when referencing other tracks that I like. And it's just a go-to. It speeds things up. Again, this is in the product file if you want to grab this template. Once finding the sounds, a little bit of the processing, removing a little bit of lows, sustain to tighten things up. That's about it. And then the main idea, again, is listening to the clap, really focus on the clap, and then focus on the clap in the reference. So not totally similar, but very close, and that's kind of the idea. Other than that, I think something that is kind of interesting that I might show you is like in the device here, you can see I have one pan a little bit to the left, the other one pan a little to the right, one pan to the left, and the other one pan a little bit to the right. So that way the claps are pushed a bit to the left and right. Then the next element that I added in was the snare. The snare is like a bit more of like a low end that can complement the clap, kind of fill out that sound a little bit. Claps and snares layered together is like a nice combo, just in the same way open hats and shakers are layered together. So let's have a look and listen to this. So there it is. This is, again, similar to the technique that I just mentioned before, building your own little library of preferred stuff in a drum rack. Super, super important. It makes things a lot easier to work with. This way I just found a couple that I liked here. I layered 2 sounds together, as you can see here. And then in terms of processing, removing some of the lows, increasing the attack a bit, so it's kind of making it a bit more punchy. Dialing back the sustain, so it's tightening it up a little bit, and increasing some of the saturation, so it's filling up the sound, adding some grit and texture. Main thing with this is a little bit different than listening to the reference. Something I'd probably recommend doing is something like this. Bringing down the snare, and then dialing it in, so you can start to hear it. And doing it a little bit more to taste when you're doing a layer like that. You can also be flicking back and forth in between the reference and what you got going on. But sometimes it can be a little harder when you're listening to layered sounds like that. So you might want to dial it in to taste like that. Next thing that I added in was this ride. So let's have a look and listen to this. So this is just a cool ride that I think I got from some kind of like remix pack or something like that. I don't know. What we got going in here is using some kind of like flanger kind of thing that I found. I don't know how I found this. Soft is what it's called, I guess. I think I looked flanger. It looks like it's some kind of flanger sound. So this is adding that kind of like little bit of like a warbly. Here it sounds more straight. You can hear that phasing. So yeah, there's some kind of cool phasing stuff going on in the in some bits of the song. I notice it might be more of like a transitional arrangement trick, but it's really cool. Then I throw in this auto pan so that it's moving left and right. I feel like that's just a cool thing to do. Removing a bunch of the lows, side chain so it's pumping, and making a kick and a little bit of saturation. And then this one, I think you can hear there's something going on there. Very like there's like some kind of ride going on there in the back end. Super cool stuff in this track. Other than that, there's some like little bits here. Like we listen to this little fills, especially in the intro thing. If you listen to the reference, so something like that. Just kind of use some of the sounds in the library here to recreate that. Nothing too crazy, because what does happen is this little fill happens very similarly in a bunch of different spots in the arrangement. So before the verse here, after this break, cool stuff there. And then one of the last things that I do want to mention that I've been doing is I've been playing with some drum processing, and that's why I have the kick out. So what I've been doing is using this other free plugin called the compressor. Why I like this, compressor, is because you can press this little magic button, and you can say like, okay, we're going to be compressing drums, and I want moderate compression, and then it'll listen to it and set the settings. So it's a nice starting point to compress everything. Compression is nice on drums. It kind of glues everything together in one way and also brings up some of the subtleties of things, so that way you can work with less elements, but it'll sound fuller. So that's kind of what I've been trying to play with in that respect there. And I'm finding by having the kick outside, compressor reacts a little bit better, because or else the kick is so loud compared to everything else. It kind of like dominates the compression settings. And what I wanted is like mostly to compress all like the snares and hats and all that kind of stuff, without like the kick coming in and adding way too much intense compression. That's kind of the idea there. And then something I do is like a mixing trick is I usually aim for about a decibel or 2 decibels clipped, to cut off some of the tops. That way you're reducing the dynamic range, and this way it's a lot easier to mix and master at the end and get a loud master. But yeah, that's a look at the drum for this one. I feel like I went pretty intense on it, more than normal, so hopefully you found this useful. And with that said, let's jump into the 80-20 rule so you can do a nice recap of all this and apply it to your drums when you're working on your next song. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention, then you probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your drums. The goal here is to get 80% of the results with only 20% of the time, energy, or effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule for drums is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're effortlessly hitting 80% of a very professional sounding track. In particular, we focus on nailing the pattern, sound selection, and the volume compared to the reference track, so that we keep things fast and focused as we're building out our drums. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume, as well as a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our drums. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and to build up a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist of videos where I remake drums from other songs from the Beatport top charts. Or if you want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, definitely check out this video right here.